The Nitro Deck Switch peripheral was a blessing to the community. The Switch slid into it, had good button setups, and was all around just a great accessory. Since then, the people over at CRKD were planning a sequel device to improve upon criticisms and wishes that a lot of people wanted. So now we have a new Nitro Deck with a load of new features and buttons. I've spent a few weeks with the peripheral, so let's dive in. Here is my review of the Nitro Deck Plus. With design, it's very similar to the Nitro Deck. It's a big peripheral the Switch slides into to basically morph it into a new handheld console. This works with both the older Switch models and the OLED. Much of the rest looks similar as well. We have all of the Switch's buttons, most of which are in the same place as before, though the analog stick placement has changed. Instead of having the right stick below the face buttons, it is now above the face buttons. This design change is likely geared towards shooters where your thumb will rarely leave the analog sticks. And on that note, many people might criticize that decision to make a shooter-based setup, as the Switch isn't exactly the go-to gaming device for shooters. But it's often easy to forget just how many great shooting games are available on the Switch. Performance may be hit or miss with live service games like Fortnite, Overwatch, and Apex, but the Switch has access to great ports of the BioShock trilogy, Borderlands, Doom, Metro, Sniper Elite, Turok, Wolfenstein, Zombie Army, and the list goes on. It might not be the go-to source of shooters, but a lot of the greats of the genre are available here. We've also got some old and new customizable buttons. On the back of the device, we have 4 custom buttons where the fingers rest, by default set to use the 4 face buttons. And on the front, we have 2 new buttons as well, to the left and right of the analog sticks. These are set to B on the left and A on the right. Pretty much everything else looks the same, at least physically. The buttons feel very similar outside of the analog sticks, and are the same size, from the face buttons to the large paddle-like triggers for ZL and ZR. But we've got some improvements here as well. First is with the locking mechanism when inserting your Switch into the device and the kickstand on the back. When using the original Nitro Deck, you had to push the Switch down into the device with a decent amount of force. It made a loud snapping sound that sounded very far from normal. But on the Plus, you can ease the Switch in and the latch easily just grabs it and locks it into place without that extra push. The same kind of quality of life feature was set up with the kickstand. You needed to use a decent amount of pull to get the kickstand of the original Nitro Deck out, so you could set the Switch down or prop it up if you wanted to watch a movie on YouTube. But now, very little pull is required, and it almost just unlocks itself from its position to come out and prop up. The interesting thing here is that every single button on this device can be customized, and that's with the CRKD mobile app. The Nitro Plus can actually connect via Bluetooth at any time to adjust things, download firmware updates, and the like. Thankfully, you don't need to ever do this to use the peripheral. It works just fine on its own, but the app lets you customize a lot of stuff, including remapping all buttons, rumble, you can adjust and calibrate the dead zones or activate a no dead zone mode, and adjust the trigger points for the ZL and ZR triggers, letting you push those buttons further before it does its function. But now let's get to the software improvements, and this has a lot of the stuff that the original Nitro Deck had, like rumble and motion aiming, but with new stuff, this is really just one feature. We already discussed Bluetooth being added to allow you to connect to the CRKD mobile app, but the Nitro Deck Plus can function as a Nintendo Switch dock. Plug an HDMI adapter into one port on the back and a power cable into the other, and the Plus will detect a display and go into docked mode. This lets you just hold the Nitro Deck Plus as you play games on a TV at your desk with no more need for an actual Switch dock. And I found this to be a fantastic improvement. You can essentially just put your Switch into the Nitro Deck Plus and never take it out. But there are a couple things to note regarding this functionality. CRKD has an official HDMI adapter they shipped with pre-orders and sell on their website, and that's something you might want to get over other HDMI adapters. So let's go into the pros and cons. The adapter itself has HDCP security protection built into it, something the Switch itself does not have. This means that using the adapter does not allow capture cards through a computer to record footage unless the software you're using on your PC allows you to disable copyrighted content detection. Thankfully, my AverMedia software did allow me to disable that feature, but if you don't have that option, you can use other USB-C to HDMI adapters with the Nitro Deck Plus. The 2 J5 Create adapters I use with my Steam Deck and Legion Go work just as well. But there's a catch there as well. I noticed that if I wanted to play a game that required Joy-Cons like Fitness Boxing or Pokemon Let's Go, using a third-party adapter made it very difficult to connect the Joy-Cons. Many times I would only be able to connect one, or they'd connect and immediately disconnect. But if I use the CRKD's official HDMI adapter, they always connect and work without any issues. Just something to keep in mind. Now let's talk about handling. The weight feels no different from the original Nitro deck, and all of the buttons do feel really good to use. All of them feel the same outside of the analog sticks, which now have a bit of a rubbery texture on the top instead of the harder texture on the original. And speaking of that, from day one it felt really weird to have both analogs on top of the device. My thumb running into the right stick while trying to hit the plus button constantly. After a couple of days, I'd adjusted to the placement and it feels pretty good. It's not perfect, but I no longer have issues moving my right thumb to hit that plus button. I will admit it is still easier to do on the old Nitro deck, and I hope they eventually do make a dockable deck with that analog setup, but this is still great to use. The other thing I've noticed is that the triggers seem to be very sensitive. I don't know if this is just my unit in particular. I found that with how I hold the controller, I'll oftentimes activate the ZR function by accident. This happened to me a lot in Beyond Good and Evil in the hovercraft, with me wondering why I was suddenly boosting, or in a lot of shooters where I would randomly just start firing off my weapon. Raising the trigger point helped this not happen as much, but it does still happen from time to time. I have since learned to hover my finger above the trigger instead of resting it on the button itself. And finally, let's go into battery life, which is a little weird and surprising. Given it has more features built in, I expected the battery drain to be more than the original, but all the testing I've made so far shows that it has less battery drain. I did these tests on my OLED Switch model with both Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 and Fortnite. In my testing, the Nitro Deck Plus drains roughly 5% of the battery over a full charge. In Fortnite, a full charge with the Joy-Cons will be roughly 3 hours and 58 minutes, while a full charge with the Nitro Deck is only about 3 hours and 45 minutes. I repeated the test several times to make sure I had it right, as it felt odd that it would be that much better, but I got the same results every single time. That's all I've got, so in conclusion, the Nitro Deck Plus is an improvement upon the original in a lot of different ways, most notably the intricate button remapping, trigger customization, and docking capabilities, essentially letting you replace your Switch dock with this unit on your desk. Now on the downside, the new analog setup takes some getting used to, and I've had some weirdness with the ultra-sensitive ZR trigger, but overall it's a great peripheral just like the first one. Reviews to Go rates the Nitro Deck Plus an 8 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.